Again, welcome to the second of a series, We the People teach-ins that the social science faculty have put together. So if you didn't grab a flyer, we have them in front detailing the next presentations coming. The next one's tomorrow. It's on women's issues at 4 p.m. And then there's another one on May 10th. And our final one is on May 25th. But we do plan on continuing our series into the fall semester. So again, thank you all for coming out this morning. My name is Janae Hund. I am sociology faculty, and I will be giving about a 20-25 minute presentation, and then we will be shifting to our panelists who will join us here in front. And we have representation from the following. We have Michael Brown from Black Lives Matter. We have Nicole Kababa from Gabriela. George Funmaker from Red Earth Defense and Standing Rock. Benjamin Goldberg from the Long Beach Republican Party, Kelly McHugh Lopez from Indivisible Greater Long Beach, and Jonathan Solorzano from the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition. And I'll mention that many of our panelists are former Long Beach City College students and/or graduates. And faculty, awesome. All right, so let's go to our Resistance Social Movements quiz. Anybody feeling like they've got a 5 out of 5 correct answers here? I see no hands. Okay, a partial hand. All right, so number 1. Who was the Shawnee chief who resisted against the British colonialism in the eastern United States, aiming to create a pan-Indian movement against the encroaching Anglo-Euro-Americans? Who was that? Not hearing. Just tell me the letter. Incorrect. B, Tecumseh. Number 2, this journalist led the anti-lynching campaign in the late 1800s through the early 1900s. She influenced public opinion and awareness of often state-sanctioned violence and killings of African Americans. Who was that? What letter? C, Ida B. Wells. Number 3, this Southern legislator, governor from Alabama, resisted the enforcement of Brown versus Topeka Board of Education in 1954 by declaring segregation now, segregation forever. Correct answer would be D, George Wallace. These are all Southern governors, though. Number 4, the first walkouts in East LA high schools occurred in what year to resist an English-only curriculum, lack of Latinx teachers, and a Eurocentric curriculum? What year? C, 1968, the blowouts. And number 5, this group resisted Hitler's Third Reich in Germany by writing and leafleting a document that challenged the fascist German government, acknowledging that every honest German is ashamed of their government. The White Rose Society. Anybody get 5 out of 5? All right, so more history classes to take then. So I'm going to start this presentation by referencing a piece in the Los Angeles Times. It was an op-ed entitled Our Dishonest President. This was a real recent op-ed, and basically the editors were speaking to the need for courageous voices. And so they said that this is going to be a 3-part series. The first one focusing on President Trump's shocking lack of respect for rules and social institutions on which our government and system are based. Second one, focusing on Trump's lack of regard for the truth. Third, Trump's scary willingness to share alt-right conspiracy theories, racist memes, and totally non-mainstream ideas. Their words. And so they posed this question to the readers. Will this system, our Constitution, our courts, Congress, and Democrats, as well as the marchers in the streets, protect us from him? If our rule of law is to sustain itself, those who oppose the new president's reckless and heartless agenda must exercise their voices. Protesters, voters, Congress, Democrats, and Republicans must find the courage to stand up to Trump. Their words. And the words of our former president, Barack Obama. You may recall listening to his outgoing speech in December after the election. It was a call to action, right, to Americans. So some of his key references in that presentation. Democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. Democracy can buckle when we give in to fear. Change only happens when ordinary people get involved and they get engaged and they come together to demand it. The work of democracy has always been hard. It's always been contentious. And all of this depends on our participation. Something needs fixing, he said, lace up your shoes, do some organizing. If you're disappointed by your elected officials, get a clipboard, get signatures, run for office. Show up, dive in, persevere. Sometimes you win, and of course, sometimes we will lose. So, because I'm a sociology faculty, I want to remind us to have a sociological perspective as we consider the content for today's presentation. So this is a quote from a famous sociologist. I'm sure my sociology students remember, C. Wright Mills, right? And so C. Wright Mills basically in this quote is really challenging us to, as we try to consider or think about any social issue of the day, that we always have to take a look back at history and how history has shaped the present and how social forces beyond the individual are shaping whatever's going on in our society. I'm going to catch in the middle of this. Seldom aware of the intricate connections between the patterns of their own lives and the course of world history, ordinary men, or of course women, do not usually know what this connection means for the kinds of people we are becoming or the kinds of history making in which we might take part. He said, 1950, we do not possess the quality of mind essential to grasp the interplay of man or woman and society, of biography and history, of the self and the world. So it's my great hope as I instruct sociology courses that my students feel inspired to go beyond themselves, their personal, and take a look at the social forces, the historical forces that shape whatever's happening in our present moment. Right? So I'm more confident than C. Wright Mills was. Defining social movements. Again, these are definitions from sociologists. So a social movement defined as a large number of people organized to promote or resist social change or the existing social order. A resistance social movement, more specifically defined as reactive, reacting to some condition of society that is changing. Now, another sociologist, Barkin, defined it slightly different. He said that resistance social movements seek to prevent or somehow undo change to the existing social structure. And another important lesson in the field of sociology is to help students to distinguish their own individual agency, personal agency, and that in relationship to social structures, or in this case, social movements. So this quote comes from three other sociologists. As individuals, we are limited in our ability to make the societal changes we would like to see. There are massive social forces that make change difficult, and these forces include the government, large, powerful organizations, could be corporations, prevailing norms, values, and attitudes. As individuals protesting, we have little power. But if we combine with others who share our convictions, organize ourselves, and map out a course of action, we may be able to bring about significant changes in our social order. Through participation in a social movement, we can break through the social constraints that overwhelm us individuals. So, exercising personal agency in the context of a larger social movement. So, a brief glance at history. So it's important to recognize that resistance social movements might take form on the left political spectrum or on the right, and probably somewhere in the middle. So some examples of left resistance from history. I already referenced Ida B. Wells in the quiz, right? She led the anti-lynching campaign largely through her writing efforts. She was a journalist. That kicked off in the early 1890s, and she pretty much took that through the rest of her life. The White Rose Society, this goes to Germany, right? This was also a very small group of college students and a college professor who, like Ida B. Wells, exercised their voice through writing. Right? They did no other action other than writing and leafleting their writings to basically challenge German people to open their mind and not succumb to the fascist regime taking order, and ultimately they were executed for their writing. The anti-apartheid movement became a global movement, started, I believe, with British support, spread to the United States. Even famous athletes like Arthur Ashe from the United States were very involved, as were college students involved in the anti-apartheid movement that traveled all the way until, I believe, early 1990s when Nelson Mandela was freed. Chicano moratorium, a little closer to home. This Chicano moratorium took place in around 1970. It was basically an anti-war stance, anti-Vietnam War stance. Chicano community was disappointed with the dead bodies of their communities that were coming home from war, and it was a resistance against the war. So on the right, we also have had a history of resistance. So shortly after slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, we see the rise of the KKK on the right with, I think we know some history about the KKK, and oftentimes their support and alliance with state-sanctioned violence. You can also see a little more recently with the anti-choice movement. In their circles, it's called pro-life. That happened shortly after Roe versus Wade was passed or put into law by the Supreme Court decision, guaranteeing us women, the right to decide what happens to our own bodies in the event of a pregnancy. But of course, the anti-choice movement disagreed with that Supreme Court decision and have been organizing since then. The Minutemen Militia, again, a little closer to home. This took place in the southern borders, Arizona, California. A little bit similar to the KKK. It was a vigilante group that was not happy with the increasing immigration flow from Mexico into the US, and so they took things into their own hands to try to prevent that passage. And then, again, closer to home in California, in the United States, we all have the right to marry each other. So in June 2015, the Supreme Court came down with that decision. But the anti-marriage equality effort started well before 2015, and that's been in support with religious and politically right communities throughout the United States. So again, it's important to recognize resistance social movements take many forms, and oftentimes you've got a resistance social movement that's pushing for one change, and then probably a proactive social movement that's simultaneously trying to prevent the resistance, right? So at odds. A couple of sociological theories I want us to consider before we get to our panelists, and one of those is what's called resource mobilization. So this explains social movement success in terms of people's ability to acquire resources. And those resources could be things like money, transportation, media, time, and ultimately people. Mobilizing these people and groups into a social movement. And according to resource mobilization theory, we also see the rise of what's called social movement organizations, right, that kind of develop into a social movement industry. We saw this very strongly in the case of the civil rights movement, going back to the beginning in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott. You see the rise of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Martin Luther King for a significant time. You saw the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committees. These, again, were college students organizing on their college campuses in conjunction with CLC. You also see CORE and the NAACP. They're like all these parallel organizations that are sort of working together legally, socially, politically, and otherwise. So another theory to consider is what's called frame alignment process. So this is looking at ongoing and intentional means of recruiting people into a movement which relies on how the movement is framed. We should all be aware of this in the time period we're living in. Framing matters a lot to us, right? It's like the language we use to describe our issues, our movement. So, and framing depends, it's shaped by what we see around us. 4 stages of the frame alignment process Bridging, right? This is when uninvolved individuals or ineffective organizations kind of get pulled into a movement with others. Amplification, expanding ideas to a wider audience, which also enlarges the movement. We should probably all recognize the role of social media in pulling people into movements today. Extension, sympathetic movements support each other, which grows strength of movements. We've seen this with the LGBT movement that gained support from civil rights organizations, that gained maybe some allies within the immigrant rights community. I think we are going to have an example of that later in the presentation. Transformation. So in the event that a social movement reaches its goals, they then might change their goals, right? We saw this when the women got the right to vote in 1920, right? So we didn't have to fight for that right anymore. But then you see the women's movement sort of shifting to get women elected to office. And we should all recognize how difficult that one's been. 17% of Congress people are women in this country. So an example of framing, right? Really thinking about the language involved in framing social movements or people's issues. You might recognize some of the words above that may link to an issue you're concerned about, whether it's water protectors, Make America Great Again, Black Lives Matter. This is all framing, the language we use for our issues. I just want to mention the May Day March and Rally. Some of our panelists will probably talk more about this, but it's a good example, I think, of frame alignment process where you see kind of divergent groups, immigrant rights, Black Lives Matter, diverse groups that are coming together sort of for a similar cause. And in this case, it's International Workers' Day, May Day. Another theory I wanted to mention is intersectionality. So this comes to us from feminist sociologists like Margaret Anderson and Patricia Hill Collins. So they remind us that poor people and women and poor people of color, poor women of color especially, have often been obscured from the frame of vision of more powerful groups. And when they have been considered in this frame, these groups have often been distorted. They remind us that race, class, and gender impact all of our lives, sometimes more obviously than others. They urge us to develop a more inclusive frame of reference by asking the question, how does the world look differently if we put the experiences front and center of those who have historically been excluded? George Takei, you might recognize the name or the voice from Star Trek. He came out early on after the November election being part of the resistance. His parents were involved in the concentration camps during World War II. He's of Japanese descent. He's also a prominent member in the LGBTQ community. He says, as both an Asian American and an LGBT American, I have borne witness to some of the most egregious injustices and tragedies of our national history, where both the public and the politicians turned against us to devastating effect. Okay. He goes on to say, we truly have grown stronger together. With each new assault upon our dignity and humanity, we will grow stronger still. So welcome to the resistance, he said. It's where the next heroes of our movement will emerge. Be ready, be vigilant, and be strong. So we have a recent example of a resistance movement on the right, and that was the Tea Party movement that kicked off around 2009. I actually tried to get a Tea Party representative for our panel today, to no avail. I did talk to someone, but they were only taking donations. They could not send me anybody to this panel, but I tried. But we can think about the framing that was involved in the Tea Party movement, right? They called themselves the Patriots, right? And our series today is called We the People, and that was part of their framing of their movement. We the people rule. If you glance at some of these 15 non-negotiable core beliefs, you might ask yourself if that reflects you or the society around you. Certainly some of these might reflect our current administration values and goals. So one news item in The Atlantic published in February of this year argued that there's parallels between the Tea Party movement and the current resistance against the Trump administration movements. So the author says the parallels are striking. Massive grassroots movements, many of the members that are new to activism, that feed primarily off of fear and reaction. They're misunderstood by the media and both parties. They wreak havoc on its ostensible allies, even as it re-energizes their moribund political prospects. They can ride the wave, but they cannot control it. And they're often at the mercy of its most unreasonable fringe. Conversely, Jesse Ferguson in Time magazine said, no, those parallels are not accurate. Said there's too many differences between the current Trump resistance movement and the Tea Party movement. 2 points he makes. The current resistance movement speaks for the silenced majority of voters, while he said the Tea Party represented a minority. He also stated that the Tea Party movement was rooted in anger against bailouts of Wall Street, and particularly anger at the election of Barack Obama, while today's resistance is rooted in alarm and fear of the current administration. You decide. Are they parallels or not? We're going to start to shift into our panelists today. We've got representation from the Black Lives Matter. This is an excerpt from the Vision platform for Black Lives. Pretty strong movement. This is an image from the Standing Rock resistance, the water protectors in North Dakota. This is an image, we have representation from immigrant rights, and two of these images actually were produced by Julio Salgado, who was a former student of Long Beach City College, one of my students, great student, undocumented student, one of my best students, I might add. But he's also connected to the queer community, and he speaks through his art. I failed to mention we were to have another panelist today, a philosopher from Long Beach City College. Rachel Hollenberg could not make the panel today due to a family emergency, but she was sure to give some representation to LGBTQ community. The Indivisible movement is here today also, and I would argue that they took a lot of their cues from the Tea Party's resistance, right? And so you can find this online, their practical guide to the resistance. Chapter 1 focuses on grassroots advocacy that worked to stop Obama, again, modeling after the Tea Party resistance. They also focused on Congress and congressional re-elections to try to change who's in office, but they're organized at the local level. So we also, I believe, have some representation about women's issues and rights. On the right there, you probably recognize that image in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol on January 21st of this year. And on the left, do you recognize that image from the International Women's Day in downtown L.A.? Right? So one of these got a lot of attention, and one of them got lesser attention. The one on the left was led by women of color. That takes us into our panelists. So I'm going to ask our panelists to join us here in front so you can project your voices to the audience. Right. So again, we have Michael Brown from Black Lives Matter. You want to raise your hand or head up, Michael Brown? He's there on the end. And we've got Nicole Kababa, she's third from the end over there, from Gabriella. George Funmaker from Red Earth Defense. George, you want to raise your hand up? Yep. Standing Rock. Benjamin Goldberg is on the end here from the Long Beach Republican Party. And Kelly McHugh Lopez is from Lopes?
Lopes.
Okay, Kelly McHugh Lopes from Indivisible Greater Long Beach. And Jonathan Solorzano from the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition. So I have a series of questions that I'm asking them, and we also have a mic here. When I'm finished with my questions, I hope you have some for them. And so the first question is, what are important resistance social movements today? And which of these movements have you been affiliated? And as you answer that question, I'm going to ask you to share briefly something about your personal story that brought you into the organization or the movement. And I'm going to ask Michael Brown to start us off, please.
All right, thanks, Professor Hun. Michael Brown here, Black Lives Matter Long Beach, former LBCC student. So I'm always happy to come back home. Still here in the city, work in the city, live in the city. So, you know, I've definitely laid roots here. And I look at that as kind of an extension to my the work that I'm currently doing. The fact that I live in this community, you know, I care about it. I care about what's going on with policing and immigration and, you know, a myriad of other issues here. So I'd say that's probably the number one thing that pulled me into the work. That and I just care. I don't know any other way a fancier way to say that, but, you know, these things that are going on in the world, I understand that, you know, they all directly affect us, even if they don't appear like they actually do affect us, but they do, you know, and they're all interconnected. So that's what's inspired me to get involved, and that's why I continue to do what I'm doing. So that was the first part of the question. Is there another part or just that part?
So specific resistance social movements you're a part of?
Oh, okay, yes. I'm a member of Black Lives Matter. I've been doing anti-police brutality work for probably about 5 years, and I just got sick of sitting on the couch and being frustrated and watching these videos and, you know, not doing anything about it. So when they had the uprising in Anaheim in 2012, I didn't even really know anybody in that city, but I got on the freeway with some friends and we went to their protests and we joined in, and it was all love. And, you know, ever since I've been building.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. What are important resistance social movements today? And which of these movements have you been affiliated with? And somehow if you can share your personal story of what pulled you into any of those movements or organizations.
I think what pulled me into the movement was being born as an indigenous person. I'm not supposed to be here. The US government had a termination policy. They tried to commit genocide on our people. So just being born, being alive, that's resisting what the government, you know, I'm not supposed to be here today, but I'm here because I come from a strong people. So just being born, I'm part of this resistant movement. I'm a co-founder of Red Earth Defense, and we're an indigenous-led, inclusive group that focuses on environmental justices. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Kababa. I'm actually also a former student of LBCC and grew up here in Long Beach. I'm actually here representing Gabriela Los Angeles, which is a grassroots Filipino women's organization. Actually was born in the Philippines about 30 years ago, 1984, and has grown to over 200 affiliations and chapters throughout the world. And you might wonder why throughout the world is because Filipino women are exported across the world. There's over 6,000 Filipino migrants that are forced to leave their home country every single day in order to survive, in order to find work abroad. And my family is part of that. My mother immigrated here back in the mid-1980s, was forced to choose to be here, even though she tells me time and time again, if she had a job back home in the Philippines to support her loved ones, that's really where she would have stayed. She didn't want to break away from her family. She didn't want to break away from, you know, the country that she grew up in, but she was forced to. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm here today doing the kind of work that I'm doing with Gabriela, is that we have to understand that many of our families, whether they're immigrants, migrants, refugees, they didn't have the option. They were forced to leave their countries. And it's important to understand the roots of those problems going back home and the role that the US plays in terms of US foreign policies, in terms of US militarization in our home countries that create the conditions for us to be here, and why it's important for us to resist. And I'm proud to be here as someone who believes in the work of immigrant rights, as well as believing in the work that a people's movement is necessary to liberate our people. And so we are part of the National Democratic Movement, which we consider to be fighting for genuine independence and true democracy in our country, even though we're here as overseas Filipinos. And we want to work in solidarity with all of you as well. for the liberation of not only our people, but the liberation of all oppressed and working class people. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Solorzano, community organizer with the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition and alumni of Long Beach City College. So like Mike said, it's always good to come back home. So the reason I got involved in immigrant rights was because my dad was actually deported back in 2008. I was 13 at the time, and when this happened, I remember just being really desperate and looking for resources to try to, do the best I can do to get my dad out of that situation. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful, but I also decided at that moment that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to preventing this from happening to any other family, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So along with that, it's also important to recognize that this work isn't just about immigrant rights. I mean, we've heard from other movements, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more in detail, but the intersectionality of all of these struggles is very important, as it has allowed me to connect with Black Lives Matter, other immigrant rights groups throughout the country, throughout the state, here locally, environmentalist groups. So our struggle is their struggle, and their struggle is our struggle.
Hi there, good afternoon. I guess it is just noon, or no, not quite. I'm Kelly Lopes, and I'm actually a former faculty member here at Long Beach City College. I used to teach in the Department of English, did that for about 9 years. I also teach over at Cal State Long Beach, although I'm taking this semester off for reasons related to why I'm here today. I am representing today the Indivisible Greater Long Beach group, which is one of 3 or 4 indivisible groups just here in Long Beach or in the 47th District. And I'm also involved in another group called Together We Will, which is an offshoot of Pantsuit Nation, which is a more kind of specifically women's group. The Indivisible group is a group that I was drawn to in the, for me, the aftermath of the election. I was teaching at Cal State Long Beach in the fall, and in all of the classes that I've taught over the last 10 years, I've always tried to teach agency. So whether it be through non-fictional essays, historical essays, political philosophy, or in my literature classes, through works of literature. I've been singing this song for a long time and noticed there's a disconnect. I'm having trouble connecting with students and getting them to see themselves as empowered agents whose voices and actions matter a lot. So after the election, I was very depressed. I was very disheartened. I had a hard time teaching the last part of the semester because I was really, really angry. And when the Women's March on Washington, when that started to be publicized, my best girlfriend from high school and I decided to go with her 16-year-old daughter, and so I did. So that's what I did on January 20th, is drove from Kentucky, where my girlfriend lives, to Washington, D.C. with her 16-year-old daughter, and we had a wonderful couple of days. They actually went to the inauguration. I chose not to. And the message that I got that day, it hit me on a lot of levels. One of them has to do with privilege. There were a lot of white women there marching on January 20th. Far fewer women of color, but there were a lot of women of color. But then there was also an issue of class. Who could afford to be there? Who could take, time off from work or travel? And the main message I came away with that day is, okay, ladies, ladies and guys, so many guys. It was really beautiful to see husbands and boyfriends, and it was really beautiful. But anyway, okay, that's great you're here today, but what are you going to do when you go home? And I took that message really seriously. And I came back to something that I had been saying to my students after the election, which so many of them are Hispanic or Latino, and they were terrified of what changes were going to happen in immigration policy and DACA. And I said, okay, we we have to fight this feeling of inertness or, feeling like there's nothing we can do, and also it's completely useless to rage at the social media machine. We got to do some real action, and that is getting involved in on the civic level and working toward changing things up for the midterm elections in 2018, and that's what Indivisible is about, and that's why it makes sense for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. My name is Ben Goldberg. I'm a native of Long Beach. I grew up here, went to school at Long Beach Unified School District along with Long Beach City College. Two younger brothers also did the same. Raised both of my children here. My son graduated from Wilson High School just a few years ago. My daughter a few years before that. I love this city. I've been involved both socially and politically for over 20 years. I currently am a commissioner with the City of Long Beach on Parks and Rec. I'm here as the opposition, so to speak, so I'm not going to be the popular guy in the room today. But what I will tell you is I think that the Republicans and the Trump victory has been painted in a little bit of a wrong light. We're not being represented at the university level, especially in the liberal corners of our country. And I think that I was happy to come here today and speak to some of these issues. I think it's important that all of you students, you young people that are here, hear the other side. As by the way, my mother, it was a Russian immigrants. They came through Ellis Island legally through immigration. At that time, when you came to this country, you had to have a sponsor, a job lined up so that you could get to work. And that's how you came through the system. Of course, they did become U.S. citizens through the proper channels as well later on in life, and they always felt to be Americans more than Russians, or for a time they were also in Israel. So I do appreciate immigration and the importance of immigrants. If it wasn't the case, I would not be here as well. My father's side, I'm a third-generation Californian. I chose to stay here and raise my children here because I enjoy the diversity. Just because I'm a Republican doesn't make me a racist or a misogynist or all these other wonderful terms you've been hearing about on the news, and especially anytime a conservative Republican speaks at a university, you have riots and every other thing going on that just really, it's unfortunate, because I am the face of the Republican Party. I'm 47 years old. I worked hard. I started making $3.05 an hour washing dishes when I was 14 years old. And I worked my way into a beautiful home here in Long Beach and was able to live the American dream the way that we were brought up to do that, which was work hard, be honest, do not break laws, and go out there and make your way in the world. And that's exactly what the Republican Party stands for. And we are entrepreneurial. We believe in the American spirit. We believe in getting things done. And let me tell you something. As a Jewish American, and understanding history of the civil rights movements back in the 60s and the 70s, it was the Jews that marched with Martin Luther King and with Cesar Chavez and the other very prominent groups. And being a Republican doesn't make me a bad person, and being a Republican definitely does not represent the fact that we're not in this together. But we are a nation of laws. We do believe in law and order. We do believe in borders. If you haven't been watching the news about what's going on in Europe right now and the terrorism that's spreading throughout, rest assured, open borders do not work. That doesn't mean we keep everybody out. It just means we need to know who's coming in. Thank you.
And I do want to thank all of our panelists for responding to my call to be a part of this discussion. And I guess I want to thank also the Press Telegram, who's written, the writers have written some pretty negative stories about college campuses and faculty, and I wanted to make sure that we had an open forum here today. So moving to our second question, what is the overarching goal of one or more of these social movements, either of which you are a part or of which you are aware of? Or what do you think should be the goal of one or more of these movements? So I'm going to start in the middle with this, and let's start with Jonathan, your answer, and then maybe we'll move to Nicole and just get a different order. And if you don't have anything new to say in relation to the previous speakers, you can just pass.
So in regards to this question, I always like to tell people that the goal should always be to work your way out of existence, right? And so what this basically means is that by doing this, you've basically achieved the goals of providing the communities with with just a sustainable system of not only survival, but also one in which they can thrive. And so I'm sure my colleagues here will be able to elaborate a little more on what this would look like. But yeah, I mean, just to give you a really, really broad idea, it would be to work your way out of existence.
I mean, I think one concrete goal that we have as Gabriela, as part of the National Democratic Movement, we're also part of wanting to rebuild an anti-war movement here in the United States. We know that in the 60s there was large opposition to the Vietnam War. Well, here we are in 2017, and we have the US federal government that's spending over $596 billion in military defense. One of the largest military budgets, if actually the largest military budget in the world. And we can already see how that money is being spent. We can see what just recently happened this past Thursday in Syria with President Trump launching 59 Tomahawk missiles on Syria, on a country that just went through a chemical attack. And they said it was in the name of democracy. So how dare the President Trump and others who are supportive of this militarization of a country say that they were launching 59 Tomahawk missiles against a country that had already been suffering many attacks, war, a country of Syria where Trump himself has said that he's closing the borders, that he will not allow Syrian refugees to come in. And so our goal really is to stop these US-led wars of aggression, the US militarization that is happening, because we know that that money shouldn't be spent on oppressing other countries in the name of so-called democracy, when we know that leads to so many numerous deaths. And really, what we want to see is that instead, that money should be spent on education. That money should be spent on housing. That money should be spent on hospital and health care. We have a government that said that they can't provide for its own people, and yet they're spending $596 billion in 2015 alone on US militarization. Can anyone guess how much they actually spent in that same year on education? 6%. So 6% of the federal budget was spent on education, while over half of the federal budget was spent on militarization. And we have to ask the question, why? Why is it that our own government is spending tons of money on militarizing countries all across the world, when instead they should be spending our tax dollars on public good for the people?
I'm going to come back to Ben. I think you have a response.
Yeah, I've got to see. This is, and again, respectfully, I understand your passion and your thoughts on this, but the reality, people, is we live in a world that's not a great place right now, and we've got issues not just with Syria, but we have North Korea as well as Iran, and so we can talk about education and all the other important items, which I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'd love to see us spend more money in all those areas you're referring to. But the reality is, we didn't attack a country the other day in Syria. We attacked a military base that was responsible for basically gassing their own people with illegal weaponry that were supposed to be removed under the Obama administration. So the fact that we launched those Tomahawk missiles may not seem like a great idea right now, but may be responsible for saving millions of lives in the future. Because not only did we actually accomplish our message to Assad and the regime over there about our intolerance to using illegal chemical weapons against your own people, but it also sent a serious message to the rest of the world that the United States of America is no longer going to sit on their hands, talk a good talk, and do nothing, and allow the rest of these thugs like Putin and the North Korean leader and the Iranian leadership to do whatever they want, however they want to do it. So I do appreciate your concern about how much money we're spending, and wouldn't it be nice if we could spend less? But the reality is, if we don't take care of these problems, we won't have any schools, because when the nuclear weapons come our way, we won't be talking about education. We'll be talking about rebuilding cities. Thank you.
Ellie?
The question at the panel, the question presented to the panel right now is about goals. The Indivisible group, one of their goals is to flip districts in 2018 so that we have, so that we can restore some balance to our three branches of government. So having all of those three branches be Republican or conservative, it works against the model of, it works against the model of balance, and also because of issues surrounding voter repression and gerrymandering, we may not actually be representing the will of the larger number of constituents. The reason I asked for the microphone back, though, is that the class that I teach over at Cal State Long Beach is called Reading the World, and it is it's a critical thinking class in the literature department, in the comp lit department, but really what it is it's an interpretation class. And so what I do for 16 weeks is I present material, all different kinds of materials to the students, and we talk about how they can be interpreted differently. I also do a media studies unit toward the end of the semester, and that unit expanded quite a bit last semester because we had so much to look at with media representations and fake news and distorted news, and people not understanding the sources, especially as they're coming to you on your Facebook feed because they all look the same, not understanding credibility of sources. And I guess I wanted the microphone back right now because Goldberg just presented a rebuttal to the Gabriella Representative Nicole. And I see this as a really clear example of different sides, and that's another thing I'd love to see us get away from is these sides, this bipartisanship, but a particular interpretation that is in line or in concert with one's already established political view. So the sources that I'm looking at say that that military strike wasn't very successful at all, and in fact did very little damage and didn't prevent similar planes from taking off the same, or in the days following. So that it actually did not accomplish the goal that Mr. Goldberg said it did or would. I'm not interested in having an argument or a debate about that, but I would like to encourage everybody to remember that idea of framing and how all the information to us is coming through somebody else's frame. Somebody else is deciding how it's going to be presented and who the audience is going to be and how to best connect with that audience. So be critical readers and try to not respond emotionally, but maybe take a step back and do more research. And so that's my encouragement to students in particular, but all of us.
George, do you have anything to add to this question?
For the Standing Rock movement, it's not about just this one pipeline, because we believe that climate change, global warming, pipelines, fracking, all of that are symptoms of the problem. They are not the problem. The pipeline is not the problem. It is a symptom of the problem. So we have to ask ourselves, if it's a symptom of the problem, what is the problem? And the problem is this society, this country's disconnection to the earth, the sacredness of the earth. And we believe as indigenous people that when we say Mother Earth, that's not a metaphor to us. It truly is our mother, it takes care of us, and it provides for us. So we need to protect it. So with the Standing Rock movement, the overall arching goal is to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and that is possible. So that is the goal, and we as indigenous people are taking our rightful place in this society as leaders to teach everybody else who has forgotten the sacredness of the earth. And when the Europeans first came here, they depended on indigenous people for their survival. They didn't know how to survive in this country. They were like little children, and we had to take pity, and we taught them how to survive. We taught them how to hunt. We taught them how to fish, because we had compassion. We had love. If anybody was to build a wall, it should have been us for the Europeans. But we didn't, because we're not greedy. We have compassion, and we taught them. So it's come full circle today. The situation with climate change, we're destroying this earth, and we have to teach the world about the sacredness of the earth that everybody has forgotten about. The basic things: water, air, earth, fire. So that's the overarching goal for our movement, is to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks, George. Yeah, so these are a couple of big questions here. You know, we could write like a dissertation on it if we wanted to, but I won't do that now. I'll spare everybody that, and I'll just kind of give you the Cliff Notes version. But I think in terms of, you know, overarching goals, just for the sort of separate and disparate movements, because that's kind of been the trend since the 60s, since we had the large social movements that were in the streets. A lot of our movements have been isolated. So you have people working on environmental issues. You have people working against police brutality. You have folks working on, you know, getting money out of politics. And I think one of the beginning goals has to be for us to see that, you know, a lot of these things are interconnected, and that's the way that we really have to tackle these. So Nicole kind of stole some of my thunder a little bit, but I think one of the immediate goals right now has to be to ameliorate these sort of conditions that creates the rise of a Donald Trump, because that's what he's coming out of. And you could trace that back to the previous administration, you know, the lesser evilism of the Democratic Party, which just leads to, you know, an even scarier beast, you know, as we're seeing right now with this current administration. So I think that has to be one of the goals right now, to make our lives better, to open up democratic space so that we can organize even more effectively. And I think we should also choose a side as well. I'm not against choosing sides. I think polarization as well, and I think people would be best served, you know, reject a lot of the hysterics from the right, you know, about nuclear weapons and, you know, terrorists. You know, a lot of that stuff is just, that's all myths. So I think as far as the second part of the question, what should be the overarching goals, I think ultimately social transformation. There's a root cause as to why we're facing all of these problems, you know, and that system is called capitalism, which is a for-profit system that puts profit before people. It puts the profit before the Earth's ecology. It puts the profit before, you know, women's right to choose, and that's where it all stems from. So ultimately, we need a movement that can uproot all social and economic relations and replace it with workers' power. We're the people in this society. We make it go. We should run this whole society ourselves. We don't need experts. We don't need bosses. We don't need CEOs. We can run the society. And we see examples of that, you know, here recently, you know, with the big airport protests that shut down Donald Trump's Muslim ban. The courts came in afterwards, you know, with the legal rulings, but it was that real people's mobilization, people's power, you know, at the point of production that really shut things down and, you know, made it easier for the courts. And that made it, and we see precedent with that as well. You know, when you start talking about things like the Montgomery bus boycott, the abolitionist movement, it was people, you know, taking the fight to the system directly, outside of electoral politics, outside of these kind of narrow, you know, legalistic confines, and really, you know, asserting their power and raising demands and not compromising on them. So I'm for polarization, I'm for picking sides, I'm for us building a left and fighting the right.
Okay. And so that kind of leads into the next question. So there may be redundancy if anybody has something to add to this. Do the resistance social movements today parallel the 1960s? Would anybody, Ben would like to start?
I mentioned previously about Martin Luther King and other movements. For the most part, they were peaceful movements. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the contrast. There really isn't a lot of similarity, unfortunately, because we've got a lot of violence out there. We've got a lot of rioting. We've got kids at Berkeley, busting down windows. We've got Black Lives Matter chanting wonderful, inclusive things like pigs in a blanket fry like bacon. These are not the way you get people mobilized and actually affect change. You can get people out there. You can get them to march on these different areas, and they can show up in numbers. With social media, my son puts one button on and we got 200 people at the house for a party. I know how quickly social media can get people mobilized. But the reason why Donald Trump won, one of the many reasons why Donald Trump won, is because most of the country, not the edges, saw what was going on, saw that law and order was being disrespected, and saw violence being the way to get attention. And quite frankly, that's not going to be tolerated. And eventually, the law is going to come down on law and order. And unfortunately, innocent people are going to get hurt, not just the bad guys. So this is kind of a thing. I'm looking at these groups, and the Republican Party's looking at these groups. And that is why they're starting to show. You look all the way across the country with the governors and all the other state houses. The reason why they're gaining ground on the Democrats, the reason why they've been gaining ground for the last 8 years is because we are not going to stand for breaking law and order and anarchy. Again, we do believe in free speech. We do believe in protest. We do believe in all the things that as good Americans believe in, and our Constitution ensures those rights. But when you start infringing on the rights of others and start breaking laws, and don't get me wrong, there are a few bad apples out there. There are some bad police officers, there are bad priests, there are bad rabbis, there are bad everybody. But when you break down law and order and you go after them with a vengeance, it'll be at your own peril, because the streets will not be safe and you'll have more individual citizens arming themselves, and there will be a problem if this continues. So these groups, they're currently marching and making noise is just absolutely appalling.
Nicole?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned Martin Luther King. Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, right? Many of us know him for leading the civil rights movement. Many of us know him for his I Have a Dream speech, right? So anti-racism. But he was also, back in April of 1967, he delivered a very powerful speech right before he was martyred. And in that speech, he was condemning the Vietnam War. In that speech, he was denouncing the role of the United States in intervening and launching violence and militarization against the Vietnamese people who were simply fighting for their right to self-determination. He even went about saying that the United States is, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. So even Dr. Martin Luther King himself saw that the violence that they were seeing in the streets, the oppression of Black people and the working class wasn't just here in the United States, but that the US was launching those attacks abroad and across the world, and was very critical of that. And he took that anti-imperialist stance. Mike mentioned earlier capitalism being the system. Well, the highest stage right now that we're in monopoly capitalism is imperialism, which means that the US is trying to create more ways to receive more profits, squeeze more profits out of working people every single day. And we see that whether through it's the privatization of healthcare, the increase in student fees in our campuses, the lower wages, the longer hours in the workday. We see it every single day. But we also see it across the world. And I think it's important for us to see that the parallels between what we see from the 1960s, when there was the anti-war movement, and it was a very popular anti-war movement against the Vietnam War. Students like yourselves, teachers and faculty, everyday people were on the streets telling their own government to stop the war. Stop the war against Vietnam because it was causing violence and destruction. And we have to ask the question, who benefits from war? Right? And what we know is it's always the 1%. What we know is these US manufacturers, military manufacturing companies that are making millions of profit off of war. You know, when we see military-grade weapons launched against Standing Rock, water protectors, when they launch the National Guard, when we see the militarization of working-class communities, those are military-grade weapons that are actually the US government is using our tax dollars to pay for. And so it's important for us to be critical who benefits from these wars. And the parallels that we see now is that just like it was back then in the 1960s, as it is true today, is that in order to resist war, in order to stop US-led war and militarization, it's gonna take a mass movement. It's gonna take every single person in this room, it's gonna take 99% versus the 1%, which we hear all the time, to actually resist the oppression of our people here, whether it's Native American people, people of color, the oppression of women and LGBTQ, of working class people. It's gonna take a mass movement of resistance. And it's still true today, that genuine change has always come from the bottom up. It has never been delivered from one politician. It has never been delivered from either Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It's always been delivered by the people themselves. So it will take a people's movement to create the change and the world that we want to see. And the change is in our hands. We have the potential to do that. And I think that is the most critical parallel that we need to see. What is our role in creating the change and the better world that we want for our children, for our families, and for our future?
So the parallels of the 1960s to today, two of my heroes are Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and they were both kind of at the different tactics. You know, Martin Luther King was about peace, and Malcolm X was about self-defense, and by any means necessary, if that meant to protect yourself, to be violent, to take up arms. And I was, before Standing Rock, I was more leaning toward Malcolm X. You know, I really like that. If somebody attacks you, you have the right to defend yourself. But with the Standing Rock movement, I learned about civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action. And even though we lost this battle because the pipeline is built and oil probably is going through it as we speak, what it taught me was that peaceful protests are useful, and they are an efficient tactic. So nonviolent direct action, Martin Luther King with the sit-ins and the bus boycott, that's very powerful. So in the 1960s, there was also a movement in the early 70s with the American Indian movement, and they had armed occupation. They took over a few places, Wounded Knee, the federal building in DC, but it was all an armed occupation. But today, our movement we're in another generation. The time is a little bit different with this whole fear tactic of terrorism. So we have to take a different approach, and being peaceful, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, I think is very powerful, and that is the parallel from the 1960s, Martin Luther King with Standing Rock, is we can make change without violence. And Mahatma Gandhi also was a very brilliant man who changed the world without having to shoot or kill anybody, but through peace. And that's what Standing Rock has taught the world, that peacefulness, prayerfulness can make a difference.
Anyone else on the panel have a response to that question? Okay, Kelly?
Unless somebody else wants to respond. Okay.
You want to pull the mic?
Oh, a couple of things. So I'm one of the organizers for my Indivisible Greater Long Beach group, and I sent these questions out to my group, and I got some responses back. And while I hear and appreciate hearing from the fellow panelists about what they see as parallels, most of the responses back from people in my group who are older, most of them are older than I am. So I was 3 at the end of the 60s, so I don't have any personal perspective. So some of these folks in my group were participants in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movements of the 60s and 70s, and they almost unanimously came back with no, not a lot of very strong parallels at this time. And the main reasons are just obvious things about our society have changed. So at the time there was television and there were 3 national networks. Everyone got their news from those national networks. So what started off being maybe not completely anti-war sentiments changed over the years as people saw, video footage of, people being killed, soldiers coming home, tallies, numbers of soldiers coming home in coffins. So there was there was a center to a lot of the media at that time that we don't have now. So there is a diffuseness and a fragmentation now, where it depends on where we're getting our information. A lot of people still do go to church, but not as much as people did maybe in the 60s and 70s. Side note, I actually think that was part of the success of the Tea Party that is going to be a bigger challenge maybe to progressives now, is that there's again this fragmentation. So we don't all meet at the same place twice a week or something like that. So some things to keep in mind is, how do we form solidarity? How do we form cohesiveness? Especially when, I can't even communicate with my, 150 members in one way. Like, some people look at email, some people never look at email, some people look at Facebook, some people don't, some people only respond to text messages. So we've got communications problems, but what I see is, again, like one of the goals could be to get the groups talking to one another, working together more. That would be helpful, because we don't seem to have that cohesiveness. Also, some of the responses surrounded complacency. So there's just a disconnect between what's happening out there, and I see this personally as a factor related to the screens that we get our news on. So there's we don't know what's real, what's fake. If we don't get out in the streets, we don't know what's really happening. Mr. Goldberg, I keep wanting to say Greenberg. Mr. Goldberg, he mentioned at the beginning of his response, so he seems to have a very disdainful view of protesters, which frankly shocks me. I was at the march in Washington. I have many, many friends who were at the march in LA. So if you're talking about rallies, there's zero evidence of violence at those rallies, at the marches, at the big marches. Zero evidence of violence. There was violence on Inauguration Day. It wasn't related to any organized march or rally. So he also brought up the riots at Berkeley. This was, again, not a rally and not a march. Milo, I don't remember his last name, Yanakovich or whatever, who's some writer for Breitbart, was going to speak at Berkeley, and a number of students were protesting him speaking, and a number of others were there to support his free speech. But again, my sources that I was looking at showed something similar to the violence that happened on Inauguration Day, and that may have been purported by Black Bloc, which is a completely separate violent faction, and they're a small faction, and they do not represent protesters. They do not represent peaceful protesters. So I would remind us all again, before we have our knee-jerk reactions to whatever this group is being good, bad, or XYZ, to look at the nuances. That's one of the things that intersectional feminism insists that we do, is not place people who have certain characteristics all in the same box, but to look at their humanity and their lived experience, and to pay attention to the details of their individuality.
This is taking us to our next question. There again might be some overlap here. Thinking in terms of framing social movements, is it important to see parallels and alliances between contemporary resistance movements? Why or why not? We may have exhausted this question, and if we have, we can go on to the next one. So let's go to the next one. Conservative columnist Charles Krauthammer stated that we do not need the resistance protesters, as the courts and Congress are serving to check President Trump and his administration. Do you agree or disagree with Krauthammer?
So I'd like to start that off by disagreeing. Here in California, we've been hearing talks about sanctuary cities, right? Sanctuary state, and that's all good and well. But the reality is that we as a community still need to be there for ourselves and for our neighbors, right? Here in the city of Long Beach, we've been hearing conversations about this city becoming a sanctuary city. We also recognize that this is not enough, and that is also why we've taken on the task of organizing our communities to create rapid response networks. And so with this gives our community not only that sense of protection, but an opportunity to fight back against something that is directly affecting them. And I believe that this is the beginning of something that will spread, statewide and nationwide, and it will show the Trump administration that we're not going to wait around. We're also not going to wait around for our political allies to pass something. We are taking it upon ourselves as a community and as a people to take action.
So I'm pretty sure you can probably assume what my opinion is on this. I mean, being part of resistance movements in general, like I mentioned before, people will always resist exploitation and oppression. And we've seen that. We simply have to just look at our history for those facts and those examples. Whether it's indigenous people, fighting for their right to land, their ancestral land. Here or even in the Philippines, people are continuously fighting for their ancestral land, and they will always resist. And I think it's important when we think of protests. How many of you have ever attended a protest? Raise your hand. Ah, okay. Hopefully by the end of the year, everyone raises their hands. I think it's important for us. There's a chant that we say, "This is what democracy looks like," because we live in a world where majority of people aren't actually voting. That we see a disenfranchisement of people who are actually voting, or even when they do vote, their decisions aren't reflected in the decisions of these politicians. And so, I think when people are out there resisting in protests, it's not just about the protests; it's about the education, right? How do we see our struggles intertwined? And I think going back to the last question, in terms of alliances, the richest 1%, multinational corporations, they're pretty much in alliance with each other. They're pretty much deciding how to divide the profit amongst themselves, so they're pretty united if you think about it, right? They're the ones deciding, who's going to run for office. They're the ones that are really deciding and dictating, the prices of certain products. They're the ones deciding what policies get passed. And so I think it's important to note how united the richest elite and 1% are. And so what does that mean for us? That means that we also have to be united in order to, genuinely resist, what these attacks on everyday people. And so, for us as Gabriela, we're part of an international alliance called the International League of People's Struggles. And actually, there are 43 different countries around the world that have decided to join this alliance with us. And the reason why we're a part of it is because we are anti-imperialists. We believe in pro-people, we believe in democracy, we believe that change happens from the bottom up. And we have concerns about the way that the richest 1% are basically continuing to control different parts of the world and reap profits for themselves. And so I do believe that international solidarity, international alliances are really important. What happens here in Long Beach, California, is being replicated all across the United States and all across the world, and if not even more exacerbated. So I think it's important for us to understand how our struggles here locally are linked to what's happening around the world, because really the US government has an important role to play in that, right? And I already spoke a little bit about that. So how we link our struggles together, whether it's protecting the rights of indigenous people, Black and brown unity, the rights of immigrants and migrants, women and LGBTQ, these are part of the 17 concerns of our alliance. And we know that it's international solidarity, it's working together that is really going to be the way that we resist what we're seeing today, the super profit and the greed that we're seeing today.
Benjamin, do you have a response to this question?
Yeah, I think as I look out this room and I think about a lot of you that'll be looking for employment in the near future, unless your whole lives are going to be about protesting and marching all day. If you're actually going to try to find a job, I want to remind everyone that these corporations, these evil corporations that you refer, are the ones that employ the majority of us. I work for a bank that's very pro-LGBT and other environmental issues. And we're a bank. We're RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. Okay, so we're not the haters, and we're not just trying to get our 1% greed on. We're trying to do a good thing for the entire community. And but I wanted to get to the question, which was the Krautheimer, which myself and most Republicans do agree with Krautheimer's assessment. Peaceful protest is fine, but the resistant movements are hurting more than helping what they claim represents. I wrote this out, so I wanted to read it, because I want to make sure I got the points out. Other than the East and West Coast states, the interior of the country will not tolerate violence for much longer, and the Attorney General will enforce the laws in all the states going forward as well. Sessions has already repealed the government overreach of police departments the previous AG had put in place. Sanity is returning to our leadership, and the social movements need to understand that the violence towards law and order will not be tolerated with respect to both BLM and immigration rights groups. All we're trying to say is, this America, we all have the right to protest, we all have the right to march, we just need to do it peacefully, and we need to be respectful. We have people that have died for the freedoms in which we all enjoy, and so disrespecting our flag or disrespecting our soldiers or disrespecting our military complex is wrong. And people, and a very large majority of this country, feel that way. And that's why we saw the results we did in the last election, because we mobilized too, by the way. Our resistant groups wasn't a resistant group. Our group was for the betterment and the future, for all of your futures. The Supreme Court justice that was just nominated to the Supreme Court, that was one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won. We've got a lot of things going on here, so even though I'm not part of one of these resistant groups, I still sympathize and empathize with a lot of what they're saying. I want to see effective immigration reform. I want to see the laws put in place so that we as a society can address what we have just ignored. We can't just keep ignoring the problem. We have to address it. But the way we're going to do it, like Krautheimer mentioned, is through the laws and through our legislatures and through our courts, and that a nonviolent approach and a full approach, not just simple quick fixes, but a full approach to immigration and other issues that are being brought up today. Thank you.
Jonathan, do you have a response?
So first of all, this isn't America, this is the United States. America extends from Canada to the south of Argentina. Let's clear that up right now. When it comes to immigration reform, activists have long, we kissed immigration reform goodbye. We know that this is not going to happen with this administration, and that's okay. Because what we're doing, like I mentioned, is we're organizing from the ground up. Everybody here, almost everybody here, has expressed that in some way, right? We understand that this is not going to be handed to us. Everything we have right now has never been handed to us. One really clear example is the program DACA. Obama signed an executive order giving youth the ability to work in this country legally, social security number, driver's license, and here in the state of California, DACA recipients also benefit from full scope Medi-Cal. This was never given to us. This is a result of undocumented students and undocumented communities resisting for years, sometimes even risking deportation for something like this to happen. So to hear that Republicans want to see immigration reform, we're not buying into it. We know that we can achieve so much more when we become united.
Okay, let's go to my final question, and then okay, Kelly, thank you.
I'll try to keep it brief.
Sure.
I just wanted to make sure everyone else got a chance to speak. So the statement by Krautheimer, it actually doesn't even make any sense to me. Because what it sounds like to me is it sounds like somebody who is asking constituents, voters, individuals, members of society to relinquish their voice and their agency. What Indivisible is all about is about putting pressure on elected officials and reminding them of the will of their constituents. So here in Long Beach, we have a Democratic representative. In the state of California, we have 2 Democratic senators, but in neighboring districts, we have Republican representatives. And part of what we're interested in doing is getting better Democratic candidates in there to run against them and to hopefully win, so that we can change what's going on at the level of, the operation of the government. So this idea that we're just going to trust the people who are already in power, it's backwards to me. So we need to get the candidates, get them in office, keep them accountable, and you do that. You all can do that. You all can ask your sisters, brothers, boyfriends, family members to do that, to get involved, because it actually works. We are seeing it work. Professor Lund referred to 2 different magazine articles from February. There's another one from March, New Yorker. It's called What Calling Your Congressman Accomplishes, or What Calling Your Congressman can do. And this is being tracked. It's being, it works. So write letters to your congresspeople. Write postcards, make phone calls. There's a bunch of technology out there that helps you to be aware of legislation that's being voted on a weekly and daily basis. You can make phone calls, you can send emails, you can show up for town halls. Civic engagement. So don't leave it up to somebody else who's already in office.
I have one more question, and then speaking of civic engagement and agency, I do want to ask any of you who might have a question for our panelists, or if you just have something you want to say, there's a standing mic over there. You can form a line, or just go use that mic. My final question to the panelists is, do you think current resistance social movements will be temporary and or emotional based, or will, in fact, they be longer lasting and organized? So, Michael, maybe we'll start with you and just run down the line here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Professor Hun. Yeah, thanks to everybody for being here as well. I know there's a bunch of other stuff you could have did, but I appreciate the audience. So, just to answer the question directly, social movements be temporary? A lot of that depends. I think it depends on, a variety of factors. So I'll just kind of give a few ideas that I'm thinking. So I think it kind of depends on, what kind of politics they're infused with. If people see these problems as just, something that can be merely reformed, out of existence, then, I think they may be short-lived. I think if we don't improve our organization, something that Kelly talked about earlier, that's one of the big differences between now and the 60s is just that tradition of organization. Right now, union density is at like an all-time low, particularly in the private sector. So, something as basic as like student unions, workplace unions, like right now we have a whole generation of young people who have not seen that. Young people who came up through, the Bernie Sanders campaign, Occupy Wall Street, and Black Lives Matter, and also, the fight back at Standing Rock. They haven't seen this level of organization. So I think that's gonna be key in terms of, do our movements, really have sea legs? Is organization and also the politics that are at the heart of them. So I talked about reformism. So I think if you agree with what I said earlier, that we need total transformation, then I think we can more so build movements that are in it for the long haul. I think if people have that perspective, with the understanding that we're gonna lose a lot of times as we try to learn, those lessons from the past and try to apply them and make them work right now. But the important thing is, as long as we take the lessons from there about what worked and what didn't work, and we're always critically thinking about them and evaluating them, I think we'll be okay. So those are a few of the barriers that I see to us, potentially building the movements that are long lasting. I think that was pretty much all of it.
Well, my hope is that this movement is not temporary, and that with Bernie Sanders and Standing Rock, a lot of people got woke. A lot of people were sleeping, and these movements kind of woke people up to another consciousness, to realize what's really important. So a lot of people are still asleep, and I think it's our responsibility to try to help others to get woke. So the question for you is, are you woke, or are you still sleeping? And what point did you get woke? I think for me, when I was, 12, 11 years old, my dad took me to go see Spike Lee's Malcolm X. And at that moment, that's when I got woke and realized what's important, to see through the lies, to see through these fear tactics that Mr. Goldberg is spewing out to you today. If you listen carefully, you can see that clearly, his tone, and to be a critical thinker. You don't need to listen to anybody, but just have this common sense, intelligent, just observe somebody and their tone and what their tactic is. You can see right through it. So my hope is that you can get woke and stay woke and wake others.
I think in order for resistance movements to continue to grow, it's really going to take organizing, right? It means, joining an organization for a common goal. And so if you're not part of an organization already, join. If there's an organization that is already out there that is working on an issue that you care about, create it. Create that organization. If you are part of an organization, work in alliance with other groups. So many of us, whether it's Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition, BLM, are actually part of the May Day Coalition, May Day Long Beach Coalition, because we knew that even though we were working on different struggles against police brutality, we were working on the sanctuary movement for immigrant rights, we were working for higher wages, living wages for everyday working class people. What we knew was that we need to work together. And so I think what will determine whether or not, these movements really last is if we're organized ourselves, if we're part of something that's bigger than just one person. And so I'd like to reemphasize again that, it's nice, to be an activist, and if you're agitated or if you're upset with what you're seeing on the news, if you're upset with the student fees, if you're upset with not getting any of the classes that you need to graduate, if you're upset that you got a degree and you still can't find work, I really encourage you to join an organization and to really be part of creating the change that we need, to demand what we need. And so I think it's important for us to recognize how we can really be part of creating the change and creating these movements. Whether it was the anti-war movement of the 1960s or what we see going on today, it's really everyday people like ourselves that are really pushing back and really being able to not only educate ourselves, because I think it's important that you're all here today and getting a lot of different opinions, but again, knowledge is power, but action is empowering. And I think we really need to take action together. And it's through collective action, it's through movement building work that we start to create history, and we start to create the world that we want to see. So again, what you probably saw was a flyer that was going around. In Canada, there's going to be a building solidarity, fighting back against US militarism, war, and neo-fascism. And it's a conference of other anti-war activists, peace-loving people that really want to see us create a better world together. And I invite you to come with us to Toronto, Canada this August. It's summertime, so it's a great time, if you care about any of these issues that were talked about today, to be a part of something bigger and important in creating the world that you want to see.
So real quickly, with technological advances such as social media, Facebook, just technology that allows us to receive information at a much faster pace, we have the ability to hold the establishment's feet to the fire in that we're able to communicate a lot faster, what the issues of the world are. So this creates an opportunity for organizing, which would be the ultimate goal. But at the very least, we also create the opportunity to engage other people and create consciousness. So those would be some of those first steps. Whether or not a social movement becomes organized and thrives, well, that is entirely dependent upon you all and your willingness to become involved. So please get involved. I know some of us will be here after, so please come talk to us, find out how you can get involved. As a sharing personal experience, I actually became involved on this very campus. Mr. Ramos, who's back there, invited me over to join CLA, the Coalition for Latino Advancement. That's a club here on campus supporting undocumented students, and that is a very club that's the first club I ever joined. And ever since then, I've been getting more and more involved with different issues, and that's probably why I'm here today. So please get involved. You never know where it's going to lead you, and you never know what impact you're going to have in your communities and with all your loved ones.
Well, in taking counsel from some of my fellow Indivisible members, the consensus is that they will change. So groups spring up, and then they lose some energy, and then they maybe get absorbed into other groups. I would second what Jonathan said. Get involved in something, get involved in a couple, see what works for you, see what resonates. If one thing fades out, maybe you can, do something else, but stay involved. What I fear is that because of complacency in our busy lives and because things are not immediate in front of us, that it may take something catastrophic for people to really come together. I would hope that we don't wait, so why not organize and get involved in this still relatively peaceful time and not wait for something catastrophic to happen to come together.
It's a little ironic. I was thinking to myself before I got this question how I really liked the passion and commitment of the Red Rock guy, and of course he went Standing Rock, I'm sorry. And I do appreciate his sincerity, although of course then he went ahead and said my tone, and I kind of picked right up on that. So let me just say this. Unfortunately, and I'm representing the Republican Party, we do have a very vibrant Republican Party in Long Beach, contrary to the elected official numbers that you see. We are out there, and we are amongst all of you, trying to do good things, trying to support the local nonprofits, trying to help keep the environment going in the right direction, trying to do all these wonderful things that these people also are very passionate about. But we do believe, unfortunately, as Republicans in some of these views, we can't afford to be right and say we told you so. We're not going to wait until what's happening in Germany starts happening here because of open border policies. And if you listen to those leaders, they say, if I had to do it all over again, I would have done it differently. Unfortunately, that genie's out of the bottle. And the Republican Party is basically saying, hey, we're compassionate. We care about the people in this room. We care about the immigrants, even the illegal immigrants we care about. But what we're not going to do is we're not just going to stand by idly and allow lawbreakers and especially criminals that are here illegally and should not be here to make a ruckus of the entire country. Because all of you are impacted by that, whether you sympathize with them or not. And when one of your relatives is impacted through a criminal act from someone that shouldn't even be legally here, your personal reference will change. And I am a little older than a few of these panelists, not necessarily all of them, but I will say that I have perspective. I'm young enough to appreciate where you guys are at, and I'm old enough to know better. And I just hope that you guys will also consider, as you guys get jobs and become members of society, that you look at the other side of the coin, because all Republicans aren't bad. We're not all warmongers, and we're not all against the environment. We just want to make sure this is a safe place for everyone, including people like myself. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have several questions, so if we can go straight to the questions.
Yeah, I would just like to correct fellow panelists here. We use the term undocumented. We don't believe people are illegal. It's simply undocumented is more descriptive of the situation that they are under. So it might have been easy for your family to get in, but the policies have changed, and they are racist, xenophobic policies that have been created, that have created borders for certain people, and borders, you know, why is it that we have a US-Mexico border that's heavily militarized, but if you go up north for the US-Mexico or US-Canada border, it's not as militarized? So we need to start questioning that and start humanizing everyday people, and so we encourage people to use the term undocumented. Thank you.
Hi. Before I ask my question, I'd like to just mention that I go here and I have 21 units and 2 part-time jobs already. So there's that. But okay, my question is, as somebody who's a descendant from Austrian Jews to a descendant of Russian Jews, and I go to temple almost every Friday, I'm not too far removed. I just wonder, how do you justify, or at what cost do you want to achieve the goals of the Republican Party? You know, when you have people, even high up in the administration, like Bannon, calling Jared Kushner a globalist, which has been a dog whistle for Jews, the code for Jews for over 100 years now. You have people who I disagree with, obviously Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, but Jews nonetheless. You have them on lists from other Republicans of, you know, people who they would like be happy to take out, and they are using them as examples of like Jews running the world. And you have cemeteries being desecrated, Jewish cemeteries being desecrated every day. And if you don't seem to, I don't mean any disrespect by this at all, but you don't seem to value the lives of who you call, you know, illegal, you know, people, or even people, you know, not too long ago, we weren't white ourselves, you know, I'm clearly white, but not too long ago, we wouldn't have been considered white. But, you know, you don't seem to value the lives of non-whites very much, but you don't even seem to value your own in a way. Like, I'm wondering how you can hold that, you know, these opposing things.
I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
A couple things for you to understand. I grew up here in Long Beach as a Jewish kid with the last name of Goldberg, so I am not immune to prejudice growing up. It was a lot different here in Long Beach in the 70s and the 80s than it is more tolerant here in the 2000s, so I can appreciate your comments. The other thing I'll mention to you is there are good Republicans and there are bad Republicans, and guess what? I don't think every person in the Trump administration represents my viewpoint either, but I do see as a general rule that I'm glad that he's able to, one, keep the Supreme Court in balance the way it was when Scalia was on there, and there's other issues that are very, very important to me, that are more important to me than worrying about the one or two guys that he surrounds himself with that aren't great people. And just so you're clear, Bannon's now off the Security Council, which is a big blow to him, so we can tell who won that one. So I appreciate it as a Jew that grew up here in Long Beach, where we have police cars positioned outside of our temple to make sure terrorists don't come and everything else. So I appreciate it. I went to Hebrew school and I went to temple for every Friday night. My kids were all bar and bat mitzvahed, so I can appreciate that. But just because I'm a Trump supporter and a Republican doesn't mean that I support all Republicans. There are a lot of Republicans in part of this country that are very racist and are very bad people, but that doesn't mean that I can't associate and be a Republican, but my own person. So thank you.
And we're going to go to the next question. And I just want to say we do have food there in the back that's being set up, and it's for you. The food comes from the Funds for Student Equity, so we thank them for that.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne Phoenix. I'm a student here at LBCC, and I also work part-time. I wanted to ask for each of the panelists if you have any solutions or actions that people can do here today as like a first step of what they could do to like be a part of this movement. I know Nicole and Yeah, Jonathan, you've mentioned like getting involved in clubs, and I'm also a part of a club here on campus, and I was a part of the ASB student body government, and that's kind of how I was able to reach out and why I'm here today too. So I was wondering if you guys had any like actions that the audience can take as far as like your each of your movements. Maybe you know of another movement, or like, you know, yeah.
Thank you, Cheyenne, for that question. We're working on divesting from the banks that are funding the pipeline. So if I can get a show of hands, how many of you guys have accounts at Wells Fargo? Can you keep your hands up? Wells Fargo, Bank of America, US Bank, Citibank, Chase, Bank of America. All of those banks are funding indigenous genocide and the pipeline. So what we're working on now is for the city of LA to divest, and it looks like it's going to happen, which is going to be a big thing. One of the biggest cities in the country to divest from Wells Fargo. We had Santa Monica divest, city of Davis, Seattle. All of these cities are divesting from these banks that are funding the fossil fuel industry. So I was with Bank of America for a long time, and I chose to close it out and transfer it to a credit union. So what we're working on and asking all of you who raised your hands to please take your money out of those banks and put them in a credit union. They're community-based. So if you want to learn more about the Divest movement, you can go to one of our allies' pages, Divest LA, and they're leading the way in the divestment movement. So.
I already mentioned the flyer that was going around for the International League of People Struggles International Conference that's happening in Canada, which we invite you to attend. But actually, there is a huge peace tour that's taking place here in the United States this month. And it's actually a peace tour because there's a delegation from the Philippines that's going to be coming here. And if you didn't know, there's been an ongoing civil war in the Philippines for over 49 years. And it's important that we understand that the people of the Philippines are calling for just and lasting peace. The indigenous people in the Philippines are calling for respect of their ancestral land. We know that the pipelines of Dakota are also similar pipelines that are happening all across the world. And so we have an important peace delegation. So 5 delegates, including 2 indigenous leaders from the Philippines. I've actually collaborated with Cheyenne, who I met here at LBCC last year, and we did a collaborative event with Native American leaders here in Long Beach, met our Filipino indigenous leaders. And so I just wanted to invite people to participate in the peace tour that's taking place at the end of April. So we're going to be having a walkathon, which is called Lakad, which means walk in Tagalog. We're having a walkathon, 5K, so you can walk, on April 29th in the morning, and it's going to be in the Pasadena area. But we invite you to come. It's actually to raise funds for indigenous schools in the Philippines who are trying to protect their ancestral land, the right to learn about their agriculture and their history. But the day before that, at April 28th, we're also having a protest action in front of the Philippine embassy in Los Angeles. And the reason for that is because it's the anniversary of a foreign policy called Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, also known as EDCA. So if you Google that, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, it's the anniversary of Obama coming to the Philippines and promoting a military policy which would allow the US to use any of the Philippine military bases as their own, essentially turning the Philippines into a military base for the US. And so this policy was passed in 2014 that we are continuing to protest because the Philippines was also used during the Vietnam War as a launching pad against the Vietnamese people. And again, we do not want to see the Philippines used in these wars against other oppressed people, let alone militarizing our own country. So we invite you to that action on April 28th at 5:30 p.m. to meet our Peace Tour delegates. If you want more information, I'll stick around a little bit longer, but this is an important important time to call for just and lasting peace in the Philippines and all across the world.
And I'm going to jump to Benjamin. He has to exit, so he wants to give his response.
Yeah, thank you, and I apologize. I do have an appointment at 12:30. I love this stuff, so I'd love to stay here all afternoon, quite frankly. But I do want to leave, before I leave, I just want to say that I appreciate all the members on this panel and their views. Although we may not have direct and distinct agreement on every item, I certainly do appreciate the fact that we live in a country that allows us to express these views peacefully and different sides of the story so that everyone can hear it. And I want to thank the audience for also being respectful, because I know that passions run high. We're all very passionate about our views, and whatever they may be. And I just want to say that the Republican Party is again live and well here in Long Beach. I will make sure that if anyone's interested, I will get the information to the wonderful person who put on this forum. And anyway, again, thank you all, and I look forward to hopefully coming back again and speaking. So thank you very much.
Mr. Goldberg, please, before you leave, I got in line just to ask you a quick question. Could you please? This is sort of about think globally, act locally. I couldn't help but note that you're a member of our city's Park and Rec Commission. And there are three local concerns when you say to trust our elected leaders and don't protest. Believe me, I'm tired. I have been an activist for over 40 years, and there's nothing more that I would like to do than stay home. But along with other activists, I'm concerned about some local issues. One is the use of Roundup in our public parks. Long Beach uses Roundup every tree, park benches where children play, along the streets. And now we know that Monsanto has been begging to not be labeled a carcinogenic, but has failed at the state level. And what assurance do we have that our Parks and Rec will forbid the use of Roundup in our public parks? Second, we have a healthy communities policies that say that all recreational facilities, new ones, will be put in communities that have been underserved in the past, according to our healthy communities policy of Long Beach. And yet, we are proposing not only to rebuild, but to double the size, more than double the size of an Olympic swimming pool into 2 swimming pools in the wealthiest, widest part of Long Beach. Will you weigh in as a Park and Rec Commissioner about putting that facility, or at least part of that facility, in an underserved community? And 3, we have the Los Cerritos wetlands, which are about also a park, part of our Parks and Rec community, that are facing 2 impending major changes. One is a rezoning that will put up to 8,000 new housing units on the edge of our bird sanctuary. 2 is the drilling of 120 wells, almost half of them new oil wells. Not fracking in the newest term, but certainly water injection wells on either side of an active earthquake fault in a liquefied zone, which will, according to the developer, add 200 million new barrels of oil. Okay. You talk about the Republicans being green. On all 3 of those issues, you have a chance to weigh in. What is your stance?
Okay, so thank you, and I'll be very brief out of respect for all of you, because this is really not the forum for it. But I will just say that all 3 of these items have been before the commission that I serve on, one of which I have no control over, which is the Tidelands-related item of the pool, but I'll make quick, brief comments. One, we are concerned about Roundup as well as commissioners and as citizens, and you have if you've been to our meetings, you know that we've raised these concerns. The city is still actively working at alternatives to not using Roundup as much and eventually eliminating the use of Roundup. But at this time, costs and the fact that it has not been officially determined that it's a carcinogen at the local level, at least at our point, we're not in a position to do what you'd like today, but we are working on that. As far as the pool goes, I will tell you, yes, it's in the very nice part of Long Beach, because the original Olympic pool was in a very nice part of Long Beach, and so we're basically using, although we've expanded the footprint, the reason we expanded the footprint was so that to allow more community to access the pool, and for it not to be just an Olympic forum or Olympic trials as some have claimed. We're trying to make it open to everyone, and we want more people to come from all over the city to utilize that beautiful pool, but we are still working on funding anyway. And again, I'm not on that particular item because it's entitlements. Entitlements is not under the Parks and Rec purview. And the Los Cerritos wetlands, I will say that I really would rather not comment because that really isn't our purview at this moment. But if you come to my meeting and you want to speak at our meeting or try to get one of these items on the agenda, we are happy to entertain that, but this is definitely not the time or place. But thank you for bringing them up to the people.
Would you agree to put the item of the Los Cerritos wetlands on the Parks and Rec agenda?
I would agree to, if you want to send correspondence, I'll have to look at all the details because what you said in 2 minutes kind of went right through me. So my answer is I can't take a position on it without the facts, but I need to have the facts.
Yeah, our city manager controls every agenda of every commission. We might have a city council, but see what the city manager supports and you'll find what gets on agendas.
Again, thank you everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben Goldberg. Do we have another question?
Actually, I have a statement. I'm Margie Ali. I'm a student here at Long Beach. I'm also a Democrat, but I was in the military for 10 years, and I have a different view on what everyone is saying about war. Sometimes war is needed to bring a voice to these people so that these extremist leaders can actually, hear it. Because just like in Syria, what happened, we weren't there to destroy the people, we were there to destroy the problem. Even though it wasn't quite effective, it also sent a message to the extremists of that nation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Zach. I'm also a veteran and a single father and a student here at Long Beach City College. I have 3 questions. Some are partially answered, I think, but maybe it'll give you an opportunity to just reiterate or expand more. The first is, what steps have each of your movements made towards getting people who are sympathetic to your causes elected into office locally or higher?
I'll address that. The 2 groups that I'm most involved with are nascent groups. They've only been around for a few months. So Together We Will, 4 months, Unite, Indivisible, 3 months. So actually today is the first Measure H a couple of weeks ago, but that wasn't a candidate. But today is actually the first day of elections, and because I'm here and I'm not on my phone, I'm not tracking where some of those local elections, not just local, but so there's one in the Cerritos area, I believe, happening today, and then there's one in Georgia, John Ossoff, and there are a couple of others going on around the country. And
Kansas, I think.
Kansas, and so these are districts and states that are flippable. We would like to see if we got enough energy behind them. So get back to, let me get back to you on that maybe like later today or tomorrow. But what we have heard and seen, this isn't addressing your question exactly, but we have heard from legislators that because of the constant pressure put on them in their home districts, they changed their opinion. Well, they didn't change their opinion. They're merely changing their stance because they don't want to be unpopular about with their constituents. As Professor Hun included on the slide for Indivisible, it's all about getting reelected. So if the guys and gals, the women and men who are in office are not looking like they're going to get reelected, they will change their stance and they will vote differently. So yeah, I'll have to get back to you. But
Nicole and then Michael.
And I also just want to, make a comment in response to what folks are talking about. I think as someone who comes from a family of veterans, my father was also in the military too, I think it's important to note that we are very critical of the military-industrial complex in a sense of, we feel that it's important to be critical of how these military defense is being spent, and also just how our U.S. government isn't even taking care of the veterans when they come back home. You know, when we talk about like the cuts to veteran services, I've met plenty of veterans who are also homeless. And so what is our government doing to also, you know, protect the people who are fighting in these wars abroad? I'm very concerned about as well. And I think it's important to note that a lot of the military recruitment still largely happens too in communities of color. It largely happens in working class communities. I know the schools that I grew up in, it wasn't a lot of college promotion. It was actually a lot of military recruitment that was happening. And I think it's important that we want to fight for the right for self-determination. I don't think the U.S. is in the position to preach democracy when they are unleashing chemical warfare, military warfare against other countries, against their own will. We respect the rights of the Syrian people to their own rights to self-determination. And I think that's really important, just like we respect the rights of indigenous people to decide what should be done on ancestral land. We should respect the rights of people across the world to determine their future, that the future really is in their hands, and it shouldn't be in the hands of foreign countries. When we have to ask the question, again, who benefits from these wars? If you simply look at where the money goes, where the money is spent, my colleague here was saying we should be critical. We should read the news, and we should look at the history, and we'll begin to unravel a lot of our shared history and our shared struggle when we start to see and look critically at our history and the present day situation. And so I, you know, while I respect the comments of veterans, and I'm coming from a veteran family myself, I would like to see more jobs in our community. I would like to see more schools built in our community. I would like to see free healthcare in our lifetime. I would like to see our people being taken care of. I don't think we need any more inflation of military spending when our people are suffering, and we can deal with homelessness with the millions of dollars that are being spent unjustly across the world.
Michael.
Great stuff, Nicole. Yeah, I echo all of that. When you start talking about supporting the troops, I support the troops. I support bringing them home, and you know, building the type of social safety nets that, you know, so that our young people won't have to join the military and go overseas and kill people. So I also don't think bombing people is that's no way to quote unquote save anybody at all. So there was a lot of good history talked about up here about Vietnam, and a lot of those questions came up then. A big part of the resistance was actually active duty and also off-duty soldiers. So I think there's a lot of deferment in the military currently. You know, it just doesn't have an organized voice. So just to Zach's question real quick about electoral politics, so I'm gonna take another vantage point just real quick. So Black Lives Matter, what have we done to elect anybody? Nothing. And and for good reason. You know, I think, you know, as you've seen the uprisings in places like Ferguson and Baltimore, I mean, you saw the kids out there, you know, basically fighting it out with Democratic administrations, you know, represented by the police department. So I think what Black Lives Matter has done is actually reveal, you know, a lot of the shortcomings of electoral politics. You know, when you elect Democrats or so-called progressives to office, these people oftentimes, you know, carry out the same exact policies as the reactionary right, under the, you know, the pretense of law and order. You know, we heard a lot of that rhetoric earlier. So I think we ought to be, you know, careful about, you know, limiting ourselves to electoral politics. I'm not saying that that's your position, but I just wanted to put something different out there. I know me personally, I voted for Jill Stein because I don't believe that there is an answer within the Republican or Democratic parties. I believe we have to find something and found something that's independent and from the grassroots and that can speak to our issues and not just pay them lip service.
Thank you. Do you have another question, Zach?
Yeah, but if he wants
You want
ask
to alternate? Sure.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Ernesto Soriano. I'm a student here. Oh, you can't hear me? I'm sorry. I'm a student here. I'm also a veteran. Just a quick question. Seeing that most of us have some type of immigrant lineage, I too can trace my lineage all the way back to the Papil tribe in El Salvador. But I also have European lineage as well. So my question really is, does the American dream still exist, and how does your movement represent that?
I'll take a shot at this. There's a lot of cynicism, and I find myself giving into it a lot, but I want to believe that it does still exist, but I want to believe that it exists if we make it exist. So the biggest thing you've already heard me say this, but my biggest takeaway from the last few months is that our voices matter. So one of the groups that I'm also involved with is called Organizing for Action, and one of their mottos is your voice can change a room. It can change a room for good, it can change a room for bad, but your silence doesn't do anything. So I think about the last few months and people asking, like, are these resistance groups effective? Are they doing anything? If you can imagine, if you could erase all the voices of dissent that have risen up in the last 5 months, imagine how differently things would look, right? I mean, Trump hasn't even filled all of his immediate cabinet appointments. There are hundreds more that are not filled. The machine is, we are the cog in the machine, to quote Thoreau. It's working, but we have to keep wanting it on a visceral level. I want the American dream. I mean, if that means having a home to you, if that means having the job that you want, those are important things. My American dream is that our voices still matter and they don't get shut down. One of my very serious concerns was something that Mr. Goldberg was referring to, actually in a very, very peripheral way, that there's legislation around the country to help protect police. Well, I don't know if he's referring to this, but there's legislation in 18 states that is trying to make it a crime to peacefully protest. This is terrifying. This is terrifying. They want to put things in place so that protesters, if they get arrested, can have their assets seized. That's shutting down democracy. So my American dream is where we get to still meet and exchange ideas, even if we don't agree, and where I don't have to fear military policing, state-sanctioned violence. So.
We're often referred to as Native American, and I really despise that term. I kind of feel it's offensive because we were here before America, and we are sovereign nations. And in order for you to experience the American dream, it's at the expense of our people and our lands. So I don't consider myself an American. I am a Dakota, I am Ho-Chunk, and I identify with my tribal nations. And I will never salute that flag. I will never honor this country until it starts to begin to tell the true history of this country and start to reconcile what they've done to indigenous people: genocide, murder, stolen land. There will never be justice on stolen land. So until this country, until this government addresses that and honestly takes a look at what they've done, not only to indigenous people, but to people of color, I will never pledge my allegiance to this flag. And every time I see it, I get a little sick. For me as an indigenous person, I see a swastika whenever this flag is, I see it and what it represents to my people. So for you if you're not indigenous, you're all immigrants. So you have to honor that. You have to begin to see that you are a settler on this land and to honor this land that you're on. It's not your land, and you benefit from stolen land. You benefit from the murder of indigenous people. And until we start to address that, there will never be an American dream for myself. I'm living the American nightmare.
So real quickly, the communities that I work with live in constant fear of being separated from their families. They live with having to make a choice of going to go see a doctor or going to pick up their kids or staying at home for fear of deportation. These are communities that are very vulnerable, right? They have, they're very vulnerable in more than one way. And to say that there is an American dream for them or even to strive for something like that is virtually impossible for a lot of these people. So I mean, I would have to also disagree that there is an American dream. I don't see it happening. At least with the populations I work with, and as well as the other organizations I've collaborated with in the past. It's something that's slowly fading away. It used to be an idea that, like Nicole said, I'm sorry, not Nicole, the brother over here. It came as a result of exploiting other people. It came as it came on the backs of many other people that will never experience this so-called American dream. So no, I do not think it exists.
Nicole, you want to respond? She wants to respond before your question.
Yeah, I think I agree with fellow panelists that the American dream is like the biggest myth ever sold to people. Can you imagine? The American dream has been something that's been said so many times again, not only here, but across the world. The American dream, the land. I work with Filipino migrants who tell me that they've been told since they were young that there's this American dream, that the US is the land of milk and honey, that it's going to embrace you with open arms. And then when they talk to us, and we ask them, well, what was the reality when you first came here? They faced discrimination, right? They didn't have work. Some of our Gabriela members from Washington, D.C., who were promised jobs here, were trafficked, and there were no jobs here for them. So instead, they were meant to work in live-in home care facilities as domestic workers. And it's a nightmare for them because they're working 24-hour shifts without breaks. And they're being told there was an American dream here for them, that if you work hard, if you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you too can make it. That is the biggest myth that capitalism ever promoted. And I think it's important for us to be critical of that because it's meant to create a wedge and in terms of like making a wedge between the many of us who are working hard, and immigrants are working hard, everyone's working harder than ever. Then why is it that we still see a lot of these huge problems of poverty? Why is it that we still see large issues of homelessness, joblessness? If the American dream were true, then these issues wouldn't exist, right? And so we need to be critical of that. And like what my colleague here was saying, a lot of that genocidal history that the US has participated in and has perpetuated has been hidden from us, right? That history has been hidden from us, and it took students back in the 70s to fight for ethnic studies. And it was being empowered with that knowledge of our shared history that they created, third world liberation alliances. They created alliances across different races, ethnicities, and they said, we're gonna fight for our liberation. And we're gonna respect the rights of indigenous people. And we're gonna respect the rights of people of color, and working class people should be fighting for a better future. And so I think it's important for us to be critical. Like he had mentioned, it's a nightmare. What may be a dream for some, it's a dream for the 1%. Because they get to reap profit from all of it, as the 99% suffer and are oppressed continually every single day. So it is the biggest myth ever perpetuated by capitalism.
Hi. So this one, you guys kind of highlighted a few times, but so it's more for iteration. Why do you think specifically for your students that you had have trouble taking agency, and for everyone, your thoughts on that as well as why do you think people are so complacent with the issues that we're facing today?
Lots of reasons, but they basically all kind of center around the same thing, that there's a disconnect. So one of the phrases that got circulated after Trump was inaugurated, not only after he was elected, but after he was inaugurated, was how could so many people not see that they had just voted against their better interests? And there's a term called cognitive dissonance, and so it has to do with a projection of yourself out into the world, where either these things don't affect you, they don't matter to you, you are protected from them somehow. So unless it gets immediate somehow, then people are just, it's very easy to, you know, turn off that one source of information and turn on another source. I actually have a quote from one of the gals who wrote back to me, in response to some of the questions. She said, the U.S., it's a reference to something she's just said about being politically active. She says, the U.S. doesn't feel that. We are complacent. How do you wake up 400 million people to feel empathy and realize the struggles of the world when they can easily tune in 200 cable channels or watch a sporting event on TV or eat Doritos? They are contented and safe. So it's just a matter of immediacy. It's an abstract threat right now for a lot of people, and until it becomes an immediate and visceral threat, they'll continue to do the more comfortable thing, which is to not get involved.
Nicole?
I think the complacency comes in a lot of different forms. I talked about a little bit about like our whitewashed history, where history is, the true history of our people, of oppressed people, has been deprived of them. In the Philippines itself, the US launched colonial schools in the Philippines, where they forbid them to speak their own language. They didn't study about their revolutionary history. They didn't study about Filipino leaders that led movements of working class and peasants against their oppressor. Of course they wouldn't, right? Because the history that we learn in our textbooks are written by the oppressor. And so I think it's important for us to understand how that deprives people of the opportunity to learn our true history. So I encourage folks, The People's History of the United States, an incredible book to read. History from the bottom up is very important. I also think that corporate media has a strong role to play in also exposing people more so to a narrative by the richest 1%. So if you even do some research on who owns media, mainstream media, I'm talking about like Fox, I'm talking about CNN, I'm talking about all these news outlets that you see online, you see on your television, that you see on your cell phones. A lot of it is owned by corporations that are promoting themselves, right? And they're promoting the narrative that they'd like to see. And they're not gonna promote a narrative of resistance. They're going to tell you that, you know, these protests aren't working. They're going to tell you that these protests are riots. They're going to tell you that change only happens when you have a charismatic leader and individual. And that is simply not true. And so we have to, again, think critically, like fellow panelists said, like, where's this news coming from? Who is behind this corporate media, and why are they sending this message to us? And it's no surprise that we see complacency, even though people are feeling the suffering and feeling you know, the exploitation more than ever. I think we have to create spaces like this so we can have dialogue, so we can share people's histories, and with people who are part of movement building work, I think that's also important to go into the communities and also learn from them as well. We also have a lot to learn.
And I also want to speak about myself, and I feel very privileged to be a faculty member here at Long Beach City College. I feel very privileged to be able to be a medium to present these folks, voices that you may not always get to hear. I'm also a mom of elementary school age children, and it's so striking what Nicole was saying about a whitewashed history. My kids go to a very multi-ethnic, multiracial, diverse student, and I cannot believe the history they don't get. And I think my kids are very privileged because we read. We read every day. They read history. They're first grade and third graders. And as we think critically, I challenge us all to read, and read histories that may not be our own, but may be our own. And I, again, just want to thank all of our panelists and all of you for you using your agency, even just to stay probably about an hour longer than what this was intended to go. There's a display in the back that was put together by some students at Long Beach City, and they're in an informal group called Long Beach Students United. There was the representation from the Feminist Club. There was representation, the CLA was mentioned, Cheyenne. Is your student club still active, maybe, but you know, there's a lot of folks here in the crowd that we've heard these calls to get active, to get organized, to join a group. So this is an opportunity for you to make some contacts. So again, thank you all for coming out. Looks like we're going to continue the discussion, but we have some food in the back, and I can't stay here perpetually. So, but it looks like you have another follow-up question.
It was just one last question. Sorry, it's so long. Aside from direct protest, how often do each of you try to meet with those of opposing views and sit down and have a discussion about those issues? That's all.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, so when you talk about opposing views, I think it depends on, I mean, there's degrees to that. I mean, the panelist who was sitting here earlier, I mean, he's talking about something totally different. So I personally wouldn't waste my time with people who are that reactionary. I would not sit down and talk with them, but we have canvassed in the community, and we do confront ideas. You know, people have a lot of contradictory ideas. People have this idea of false consciousness, and sometimes people just don't know. That's another thing as well. So I think our time is better spent engaging folks along those lines. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's plenty of people out there like that who are, you know, not necessarily sold on either side, but you know, just maybe are seeking information or need, you know, just to have a conversation about something. So my whole thing is to, you know, is to organize, you know, those who are, I guess you could say, more advanced, to win over the people who are on the fence, and then to neutralize the, you know, the reactionaries, like we heard earlier. Now, we want to neutralize that and put that off in the corner. We're not going to deal with that. So that's my take on that.
As a group, we haven't had any organized sit-downs with, I would say, like, you know, opposing people with opposing viewpoints. We've had a lot of discussions about how to have those kinds of conversations in our own lives, and a lot of people are saying, nope, don't have the energy, don't have the time, don't want to engage. Other people are saying, you know, there are people in my life I really care about and who care about me, and we're trying to see if we have some, you know, middle ground or some area to compromise. I personally think that this is important to do if you can do it, if it makes sense for you in your life, because the polarization, I understand it, and there's a part of me that really would like to be much more radical than I am, but for whatever reasons it doesn't seem to work for me, but what I'm doing does. But what I think is more interesting is what we're doing here today. So this is, I took a lot of feminist studies classes and feminist political history, and what I'm more interested in is engaging as a group with other groups where we hear more standpoint politics. So honestly, my group is a lot of middle-aged white women. And we are trying to do outreach and trying to get more people of color, trying to get more young people, but it's really hard. People have complicated schedules, or they maybe don't see their interests reflected in our plan. So I'm trying to work with these other groups. Together We Will, Organizing for Action, and Long Beach United, but honestly, most of them are middle-aged white people too. So I'm more interested in coming to things like this and to hearing from people who have different life experiences and different political perspectives, and growing that as an important factor in the I was going to say the revolution, in the resistance.
Just real quickly, all I would say is that you know, I'm all for open dialogue, especially in an academic setting like this. But when you have to speak to someone, or you even have to, you know, convince them of the idea that people's lives matter, I just don't think that's worth, you know, wasting your time. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, you know, In addition to protests, we do educational workshops, we do panel discussions, we do door knocking, we do flyering, and we don't go out there assuming people are going to oppose us. You know, we actually assume that if you're willing to learn or if you're willing to listen, that's a great way to engage people. What becomes a problem is if people aren't willing to listen and if they feel like they have nothing else new to learn. I think that's when it becomes a problem, because then what's the point? I think is what a lot of fellow panelists are asking here. But I think what was brought up earlier is like majority of people, you know, we still see a lot of complacency, but I think again, it's up to us as organizers, as people who believe in justice and believe in genuine change to go out there and meet people where they're at. And so I think it's not necessarily about who opposes us, but like how can we build a movement? How can we move people to you know, be a part of creating positive change? And I think that's what's most important.
I think it's important to engage people with different views. We've been criticized at a lot of our marches and rallies about this term echo chamber, that it's the same people, they agree with everything that we're saying, and what does that do if we're just, we need to educate, we need to share, and we need to have dialogue with people that maybe we can reach. So I think it's very important that we have discussions and dialogues with people like Mr. Goldberg. I don't know if there's any hope for him, but you know, I think it's worth a try to, because there's a human deep down inside him. There's a human being that we can touch, and we need to expand, and not just the same people who agree with our, because it's an echo chamber, they call it. So I think it's very important to have dialogue with people who don't agree with us.
Since you said that we could not only ask a question but make a comment, I know everybody's been sitting here a long time, but as I think I'm 72-year-old, I'm one of the elders in this room. There were 3 of us. Looks like they're down to 2 of us. Just to give a perspective, I was involved in the 60s anti-war movement very peripherally, but it wasn't until I met the American Indian movement, my awake moment, my wake-up moment, that I really saw a new world, a world that was incredibly painful to become aware of. Now termed white privilege was just normal to me. When I had my children who are Native American, they had a very different experience going through public school. You know, I have been known to chase a kid around a baseball field for making fun of my son's long hair. So I became a different kind of mother based on the experiences my children were having. In the anti-war movement up to the Iraq War, I was clubbed in a very nonviolent anti-war demonstration in LA simply for holding a camera, as were 5 other people. Got some money to paint my house because it was on TV, but that cop's still there. I don't agree with Mr. Goldberg. I would like to be able to agree that we can just trust authority, whatever authority that happens to be, or even elected officials, because we consistently fight. This Roundup thing is a no-brainer, you know. But what I really want to say is about the American dream. I think, especially young people in the room, you've got a dream. Our dreams, our visions, our imagination, our hope to have a beautiful life, that's part of the human experiences. Everybody's entitled to dream. To limit it to some kind of an American version of that dream, or anybody else's version but your own, is to limit you. You know, and so I would not, in spite of learning, as you learn, the horrible realities of our today when you open a newspaper, or the horrible things that human beings are capable of, I would just encourage you all not to become, you know, discouraged to the point where you stop dreaming, you know. And I would also like to share with you this older activist term. When I became an activist, I was always thinking about the people I was fighting against, including the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or whatever version of Mr. Trump is out there. But, you know, when this elder activist was retiring and was being honored, and he said, you know, the greatest thing about being an activist is all the wonderful people you meet. And, you know, activism it's a lot of fun too. And it's empowering. What you said, you know, knowledge is power, but action is empowering. And as powerless as we are made to feel at times, you know, just find your heart. Like John said, everybody's got one. You know, be a human being. Trust your heart. And, you know, good luck.
On that note, I thought that was a good way to end, but we've got another thought.
Let's call it. My name is Darian. I go to Long Beach City College. I want to major in philosophy, theology. I really thank you guys. Really thank you for all the people who came up here to speak. You guys really opened my eyes. You know, I really don't like watching news because of the fact of all the horrible things that are going on. I'd rather just, you know, focus on the here and now. You know, whether I could still go to school, and I could still live in the house, I could still do this and do that, I could still socialize with people. Thank you for just, you know, just really, you know, like what you said, I don't know your name.
Nicole?
Jonathan?
Jonathan or George?
Yeah.
Overall,
Nicole?
okay. I'm like,
sorry, what's called? I really thank you for just bringing up the whole American dream is like a myth, the biggest myth. You know, and like to go off of whoever came up earlier. I don't know which shit. Okay, yeah. So, how do I say this? It is, you know, we all have our different dreams. You know, we shouldn't give ourselves, you know, that to go off of the American dream or what people say. We should go off of what we believe, what makes us happy. You know, and that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So again, our We the People series continues tomorrow at 4 o'clock. It focuses on women's issues, and we've got 2 more in May, and no doubt we'll continue this in the fall, and maybe we can do a second round in the fall, see how the movements are going. Thank you all. There's food in the back, and again, thanks to the social science faculty, Carlos Ramos and Lisa Orr, spearheaded the beginning of the We the People series, and others of us jumped aboard. Thanks a lot.
thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Hunt, for putting this together.